Hello, and welcome to Hospice Insights, the Law and Beyond, where we connect you to what matters in the ever-changing world of hospice and palliative care.
An ounce of prevention, keys to understanding and preventing AI and cybersecurity risks. Jody, I'm so glad that you're here with me yet again. You're like a repeat guest, so thank you for sharing your wisdom on, I guess, I don't know if this is happier topic than False Claims Act, but maybe it's, I don't know. They're both, I think, cause heartburn to people, but talking sort of AI, cybersecurity risk, and I know you recently did a webinar for the firm on some of this stuff, and so we wanted to pull that through to the podcast, because what you did was really focused on healthcare, and I think, there's things that people, ChatGPT, I hear about that, but then they don't really think about, well, how is that maybe changing my business, and what risks does that open me up to? And so I guess maybe we start with, Jody, like, how do you see AI getting used? And maybe too, in terms of your background, because I always think of you as a white collar crime, False Claim Act. And so how did you get involved in this space?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here with you again. So thank you so much. And how I got involved in this, it's kind of a natural segue from so much of what I do, which is the kind of retroactive, okay, what went wrong, or what is at least somebody accusing my client of what went wrong, and turning that into a prospective view of how do we prevent, and then, how do we deal with or minimize the what went wrong situation so that they create the least amount of, risk and fallout on the back end. And I'll tell you, Meg, AI is not, I'm not naturally sort of a computer and software and STEM kind of oriented person. And so when I even started hearing about AI in the healthcare space, I was a little resistant even to rolling up my sleeves and digging in, because it just felt like, it just sounds uninteresting. The truth is, it's fascinating. And you mentioned this a little bit in your opening remarks. Bit of a double-edged sword, because as amazing as the frontier is that we're currently on, there is a flip side to that, and that flip side is that there's risk, and that presents opportunity to figure out prospectively how to keep risks at a minimum.
Yeah. Well, I know some of our clients, some of our hospices use like predictive analytics and certain tools that they buy and things like that. But what kinds of AI do you see some of our healthcare clients utilizing? I know this could be a whole nother podcast, but I know there's now more chatter about payers using AI to review claims and prior authorizations and deny them, and which is a whole nother can of worms that, as someone who does a lot of claim defense on, are people eligible for hospice? And if you feel like, well, AI is making that decision, wouldn't make people feel really good. But anyway, that's beside the point. But what kinds of things are you seeing that are coming across your desk of how health systems are using AI?
Yeah, some really exciting uses of AI, early uses of AI in particularly in cancer diagnosis and treatment, and in the radiological space, because AI machine learning can read and detect and find, nuances in pictures and x-rays and other radiographic images even faster than the human eye when it is trained. And of course, training an AI tool is a process in and of itself. But the ability of trained AI tools to spot malignant growths that are not as evident to the naked eye, or to spot, changes in pictures and images and x-rays, is pretty phenomenal. And then cancer detection and treatment, it is presenting opportunities for more targeted treatment of certain cancers or certain growths, certain lesions. It is reviewing symptoms that may seem, at least, at first blush, to be maybe unrelated to each other, but over a series of, population inputs where seemingly unrelated symptoms are presented in people who, as it turns out, ultimately have the same diagnosis, permits more proactive intervention and more opportunities to say, oh, guess what? When we combine A plus B plus X, it turns out we have a higher percentage risk of Y. So those are some exciting uses of AI over the last year or so. And most of the big companies who are really jumping on board to develop AI tools in healthcare have made exciting announcements. For example, Google trained an AI machine to spot and diagnose and grade diabetic retinopathies faster than humans were, doing that. MIT researchers developed a machine learning algorithm that registers brain scans and other 3D images about 1,000 times more quickly than they were otherwise being looked at. And so that, enables more novel, learning and diagnosis techniques. Stanford, for example, announced that its researchers developed an algorithm that reviewed x-rays and developed or could detect 14 pathologies in a matter of seconds. So, that's all pretty exciting. You mentioned something that was really interesting in your comments that I want to circle back to, though, and that is humans should be treating humans, right? And so all of this is incredibly exciting. But at the end of the day, I think that the best opportunity for AI is as an adjunct to humans making medical decisions and treating humans, and not just ceding our healthcare to machines. And I think that's a pretty common fear and good idea.
So what are the unique risks that are posed when you use this machine learning that you see that's sort of maybe different or exacerbated by the fact that we're using AI tools to do some of this stuff?
Yeah. So, consent. Are patients being fully informed, and are they fully consenting to the use of AI in their, diagnoses or treatment modalities? Is there a human involved in the decision making, and what kind of disclosure are we making to patients to ensure that they are knowledgeable of it and comfortable, with it? And then, of course, if there is an issue where somebody believes that malpractice has occurred, where did that happen, and was it in a machine process or a human process? Those are some risks. Other ones, for those in the legal field, there may be some familiarity or even just anecdotally with hallucinogenic output by some machine learning. So it's kind of famous or infamous now, but there was a lawyer who filed a brief.
Oh, yeah.
and the AI tool had just made up a bunch of case law and cited things that were never existed, and that's incredibly frightening. And so we want to make sure that our machines are not hallucinating any sort of input output or diagnoses, decision making, and so on. The usual concerns, physician patient relationships, and wanting to protect that environment and that relationship well. And then there has been some exploration of whether AI uses in healthcare might, certainly this is not anyone's, desire on the front end of things, of course, but could the output possibly reflect some gender or socioeconomic or other biases, racial biases, for example, because of the input of data?
Oh, sure.
But if the input is only as good as, well, it so happens that all of this information was gained from elderly and fairly wealthy white males. Well, what are we leaving out of the output if that is really the only input? So those are some of the balancing factors and risks that need to be considered whenever talking about all the wonderful benefit of AI in healthcare.
So I know in your webinar you talked about breach risks and are there unique risks in terms of breaches when you're using these tools that are, obviously, the HIPAA security rules been around for a long time and people have dealt with breaches like, oh, I sent an email to the wrong person or I did something. But when you're using these tools that obviously all electronically based and stuff, what kinds of breaches are you thinking might be a possibility with these tools that maybe people aren't thinking about?
Yeah, that of all the risks that I mentioned a few seconds ago, and I didn't mention this one, so I'm so glad you brought it up. This is the biggest one because mass quantities of protected health information and all of the fields that are populated within a healthcare database are a very rich target for folks who want to misuse other people's private information. And so that, without question, access to that level of information at that quantity and scale easily presents an extraordinary risk to the folks housing that information and the security of it. And I'll tell you, Meg, it's really interesting that the way most data privacy issues happen is a bad email, a phishing scam email, and somebody and heaven, bless them all, because we all make the mistake of clicking on an email that looks valid. And you know what AI has done? AI has created better phishing schemes, more accurate looking emails that make any of us so easily prone to that click that we regret. But one bad click can create this, phishing problem. And suddenly all of this incredibly rich data could wind up in terribly wrong hands. And so that whole data privacy risk is really quite significant. And so, a lot of the goal of companies that are excited about using AI or are hosting this information, a lot of their thought process really should be centered around protection, avoidance of risk, and then immediate reaction if indeed there is some kind of breach.
Yeah, it's interesting, the whole phishing thing, because we had a hospice client recently have someone click on an email, and we're in that process of evaluating, what happened here, was anything compromised, and they, whoever's generating AI or otherwise these phishing schemes that then, sends out some email and then you deal with all the passwords, the password that, I used to log in here is the same one here. There's just right. We're also humans and we don't like remembering all these passcodes and, all of this, hygiene we should have around and vigilance around how we use at work, our passwords and security and all this stuff. And so one of the things we're thinking about, I mean, typically you think people who are trying to scam are trying to get money, right? They want to sell data or something. But then I was also wondering, like, obviously hospices, prescribe a lot of narcotics, and like, would there also be any schemes in trying to get opioids or something? Like, would there be something else of why someone might target a hospice for some type of phishing? Or is it just like, oh, it just happens to be like all the rest of healthcare? Oh, I can sell data or something like that. But anyway, it is interesting. I think the breaches that we're starting to work on are very different than the breaches of 10 years ago, where I sent the erroneous email or fax, or, someone left their laptop in their car and it was stolen, or, things like that. It's just become very, very different. But I guess as you've worked on these issues, how do you see people changing their incident response to some of the stuff? And are there ways that you see people are able to also use technology to essentially have a better response on stuff?
Yeah. So, believe it or not, as often as AI can be misused in the data breach context, it can also be used defensively. So there are ways to utilize AI tools to build up better protections within the information, programs and databases. I think it's a really good idea for any host or sort of owner of this kind of data to have not only training but an incident response plan in place that is immediate. We hear about a breach or we get knowledge of a breach, boom, firewalls come down, systems shut down. We have an information security officer, internal or external. We turn to that person immediately. Crisis response is critical, because the very early moments of a data breach are the most critical moments. And then, as the hospice or healthcare entity or organization or whoever works through the incident, one of the most important things to do before sort of, let's say, turning it all back on again is to make sure that all the bad guys and worms and other, tiny threads of misuse are gone from the system. So part of incident response is making sure that everything is clean and clear before we go back up again, right? And minimizing the amount of time between those 2 points in time, right? And so how quickly can we do all of that, and how effectively can we do all of that is just so important. There's going to be, reporting, and there's going to be, things that need to be done, sort of public facing when something like that happens. But the internal mechanisms are really critical. So I think training, especially, the phishing scam kind of training, we get right here at the firm, we get
yes.
emails every so often, and we're supposed to click on, this looks like phishing, and then we get a, great job.
Yeah.
These are really good ideas. The password thing that you mentioned, unique passwords, and don't put it on a post-it on your desk, even if it's hard to remember what it is. All those things are really important. But I do think, thinking about crisis response and incident response and what we're going to do if something like this happens, and how quickly can we get it done, that ounce of prevention is really a great idea these days.
So I'm dying to ask you this question, reading the tea leaves, because you deal with, a very scary side of the government oftentimes, because you're doing criminal defense kind of work. And I don't know if you covered this at all in the webinar, but like, how do you see U.S. attorneys or other people? I mean, obviously, people are used to reporting things to OCR from a privacy standpoint, but where do you think is the line where a U.S. attorney might get interested in like a breach, and like, does this rise to like, some type of either larger negligence and like how you're maintaining certain things that exposed things, or like what do you think the government, and not just regulators, but actually U.S. attorneys, might be thinking in this area?
Great question. HHS, the Health and Human Services keeps a breach portal and makes reports to Congress, and the FBI is very involved in cybersecurity and cyber threats, but there really is not federal enforcement in the way that you might be thinking of. And where we see a lot of the current enforcement activity is actually within state attorneys general. And the National Association of Attorneys General involves a bunch of state AGs who will often work in tandem with one another in coordinated cases and investigations that are, unique in their states, but their states all join together because these data breaches, involve so many of them. And they'll act in a coordinated fashion to move into the investigation and enforcement side of things. A lot of legislation at the state levels that is already been passed or is in process in various legislative sessions to protect data privacy. And I really think that data privacy and cybersecurity are going to be a function of state enforcement and coordinated state enforcement for the next several years. Certainly, the federal government and particularly the FBI and its cybersecurity task forces will want to go after the bad guys that are doing the hacking and infiltrating. But the companies, the hospices, the healthcare clients who maintain the hacked into databases are probably going to see action on the state level.
Got it.
Criminal, not as much, but it's, it's expensive. Data breaches are very expensive. And so, monetary fines and so forth will be driven by how robust were your enforcement measures, and then how robust was your response and incident plan. Another reason to have a really good one. And the plaintiff's bar has started to get involved pretty heavily in data breach class action litigation, less so with PHI, more so with other types of data, but I'm not sure it'll be long before they start looking at PHI as an opportunity for plaintiff litigation.
Yeah. Oh, the new frontier, right? But yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot to sort of think through in terms of, I guess in some ways it's really new, but at its core, it's the same stuff we've always been dealing with in some way, right? Like, it's just the scale is different, I think. And I think all of this cyber crime, like being able to sell data, just, why do people hack people? And that's sort of a new thing. But I think, human vulnerability, now it's just, I click on an email, but there's always been, some of this is just playing out, I guess, in a different way and in a different scale. Human frailty, I guess, is at the middle ground, because when you have those phishing things like we get at the firm, because it does create this urgency, like, oh my God, like someone's trying to reach me. And then because you're always multitasking and I think that multitasking and trying to do 10 things at the same time. And I think, just like you said, I think just having, the skills you need on your team and the amount in terms of how much you spend on IT professionals. Think of what your budget was 10 years ago versus what you need now. And I think you don't always have to employ it, but contract it out. I know in the issue we're dealing with right now, they have a really good outside firm that they use that, is a huge resource on this. So And obviously having insurance for these kinds of incidences too is super important. And that whole, I'm sure that's getting sorted out too, about what you have coverage for and what you don't. And, that is a whole nother podcast series probably on insurance coverage of some of these burgeoning areas and what you thought you had coverage for. And maybe what you actually do is a whole different ball of wax. But anyway, really fascinating area. So thank you for learning it and taking up the charge, because it's like law is an area for constant curiosity, right? If you ever want to learn new stuff, there's constantly stuff to learn in the law, and applying, our skills to new areas. Yeah, really interesting. Thank you, Jody. This is, I'm sure everyone's thoroughly terrified now. So
I don't want to communicate that. It's a terribly exciting frontier. We're at a very exciting time. We just need to go in it with caution. But it's a pleasure to talk with you always and about this in particular. So I hope it was helpful.
Yeah. Until next time. Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Hospice Insights, The Law and Beyond. Thank you for joining the conversation. To subscribe to our podcast, visit our website at hushblackwell.com or sign up wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, may the wind be at your back.